Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. At AM 630. WMAL.
7:07, you're tuned in to WMAL. Brian and Brian here in the morning. Joining us on the phone line, Senator Jim Inhofe from the great state of Oklahoma. By the way, Senator, I noticed that your state went for Rick Santorum. Where are you on that presidential thing that's going on?
Oh, I was a big endorser of Rick Perry, but my horse died.
And you don't have a horse right now?
Probably my best friend, one of my closest friends, and I knew he was going to carry Oklahoma. I predicted it, I think, on your station.
Right.
Because he had two events, or one big event about 6 months ago, where he got 10 times as many people turning out that he anticipated, both in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. So I knew that he was going to carry big time. But it's now down to the point. But anyone who can beat Obama.
Yeah, and do you subscribe to this theory politically that Mr. Gingrich needs to get out right now so that Mr. Santorum can have a fair crack at Mr. Romney?
You know, I'd rather that play out. I know Newt's argument on it. Newt, unfortunately, has a lot of negatives that you put $1 billion behind and all those resources. It'd be pretty bad, the Fannie and the Freddie and all that. So I'm inclined to think that let them play it out. I think the guy who emerges from this is going to be the one who has the best chance of beating Obama. It may not be the one who is as conservative as I am. There's my hint.
All right. We often have you on and we talk about the EPA. I know you got a new book out, The Greatest Hoax, How the Global Warming Conspiracy Threatens Your Future. Has the tide turned on global warming, or are more people now skeptical of...
Oh, absolutely, Brian. I started writing the book 4 years ago, and that was back when, right after we rejected. In fact, it was never given to us for ratification by the Clinton administration, the Kyoto Treaty. But right after that, they tried. We had the McCain-Lieberman bills of 03 and 05, and all the way through to Waxman-Markey. But one thing they all had in common, and in common with the Kyoto Treaty, and that is, according to the Wharton and MIT and the rest of them, the cost to the American taxpayers would have been between $300 and $400 billion a year, which is 10 times the tax of the I used to yell and scream about, the Clinton-Gore tax increase in 1993. So there's the big thing. There is not any doubt about that. That's not controversial. On the science thing, yeah, it's been unclear. There's some who believe it and some who don't. But the bottom line is, and I'd like to have our listeners listen to this, because according to Lisa Jackson, the director of the EPA, Obama's director, even if we were to do this, if we were to pass some kind of cap and trade in the United States, it would not reduce emissions because the problem isn't here. The problem is in China, and the problem is in India, and places where they really don't have any meaningful emission requirements. And so just the opposite would be true. We'd actually be increasing emissions if we shut down here and force our manufacturing base to those other places. So that's a very significant argument. The thing I'm trying to get across is the significance of this issue. Everybody knows what Obama is doing to America in terms of the budget. It was his $3.5 trillion deficit, the disarming America with what he's doing with the military, intentionally, and it's just hard to say this, but I hope people will be listening at election time, raising the price of fuel, not going after our own recoverable reserves in this country. We're too shy. We're not talking about that. But here's the big thing, though. In spite of those three things that he is doing, the biggest one, in my opinion, is his overregulation. And this book documents how much more this is actually costing the American people if they are by regulation doing cap and trade. Far more expensive than by legislation.
Well, the president says you can't drill your way out of the problem. He said that just yesterday, I think.
Yeah, he's wrong.
You can't drill, the Republicans, they just want to drill, and that's not the solution. Then he says there's nothing, the administration's nothing that the president can really do about gas prices. This is all market forces and speculators, greedy oil companies.
How many people listening to this right now? You got millions of people out there. There's not one of them who went through elementary school and didn't learn about supply and demand. We have a fact that they cannot challenge, and that is we have more recoverable reserves than any country in the world. And just between Canada, Mexico, and the United States in this hemisphere, we could be completely free from the Middle East if we just develop our own resources. Now, it's not that complicated. And of course, this president has had a war on fossil fuels since before he was president. This is part of his when he was running for office. So it's a thing. It's wonderful. I'd love to have all these renewables and all this green stuff. In the meantime, you got to run this machine called America, and you can't do it without fossil fuels.
All right, you go back to the EPA thing, because you said a lot of this stuff is being done by executive order. If that's the case, then it can be undone pretty quickly.
Well, it can, but once you get into the setting up it's kind of like Obamacare. Once you get into setting this system up, there are some things you cannot repeal. When you start in, as they're doing right now, and they're trying to extend this monitoring of emissions of CO2 beyond what was always there in the legislation and in Kyoto, which is 25,000 tons of CO2 a year. Now, to bring that down to the clean air standards, that would be 250 tons. That means, Brian, every church, every school, every hospital in America would be under that regulation and would have these bureaucrats crawling around. By their own admission, they'd have to hire 250,000 more people just to monitor this thing. Can I say one thing about?
Yeah.
I'm on the Armed Services Committee.
Yeah.
And this thing yesterday, it happens that Leon Panetta is always.
Oh yeah.
We were talking about that.
I'm going to ask
you
about that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, Leon Panetta is a good friend of mine. I was delighted when he got the appointment from the president, but. This thing, this multinational mentality, is something that we've got to get out of our minds.
Well, hold on, let me set it up in case people are just tuning in. Yesterday, a hearing in the Armed Services Committee, and Jeff Sessions and others asked very strong questions of the Secretary of Defense about, look, you feel like you need international permission to go in and run an operation in Syria, but you don't believe you need to come and talk to the Congress.
Yeah, well, and that's right. And I'm real proud of Jeff for staying on that. I was in shock. I don't remember the exact words that Panetta used, but when he said to go to the international community. And that's what ties into my book. I have a chapter on the origins of this whole global warming thing. And it goes back to 1972. It was all the United Nations. They started the whole thing. They set up, 15 years later, the IPCC to manipulate the science to ultimately become independent of any of the other countries, so they'd have total autonomy. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here. People seem to, it kind of flows out. Well, we've got to go to the international community. We don't have to go. They're the ones that are trying to give it, the law of the sea treaty and all these things. You have to ask, where is sovereignty in America?
Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with wanting international cooperation or having support.
No, I'm not talking about cooperation. Right. I'm talking about permission.
Right, and that's what Panetta was talking about more than anything else. If there was a legal, international legal precedent or some kind of permission, I think he actually used the term permission. That's what they were looking at more than actually going to the Congress to get permission from Congress.
Yeah, well, that's right, and we see it every day, and that's what I said about this whole issue. If we're talking about imposing upon the people of America the largest tax increase in history, and that's what this would be, no one is going to debate that. I haven't heard anyone deny it. And it's all started by the United Nations, and we went through 15 years of the IPCC. Oh, I'll tell you what was kind of humorous. I also like Lisa Jackson. She and I don't agree on anything, but when she comes before the committee, and of course I'm the ranking member on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and I knew that a couple of years ago when I was going to go be the one-man truth squad in Copenhagen, after Obama had been there and Hillary and Pelosi and Kerry and all that, to try to tell them we're going to pass something over here, and I wanted to go over and assure them we weren't. I asked the director of the EPA, and this was live on television in our committee, I said, I have a feeling once I leave town and head for Copenhagen, you're going to have an endangerment finding to give you authority to regulate, to do your own cap and trade without legislation. And she kind of smiled. I knew she was going to do it. I said, when you do this, it's got to be based on science. Now, if it's based on science, what science will you use? And
right.
She said the IPCC. Of course, that's the United Nations.
Right.
The interesting part of that is, you talk about poetic justice, you guys. It wasn't days or weeks after that. It was hours after that the climate gate broke. And all of a sudden they debunked this science, this phony science, which I had been saying for 4 years on the Senate floor, because scientists had been coming to me talking about how they were rejected from the IPCC.
Senator, we boy, great stuff, but we got to run. We're way behind. Thank you so much for joining us here with Brian and Brian. We